The Conjuring is one of my most anticipated movies of this year because, as you guys probably already know, I love James Wan, the director. Now, this is a guy who did the original Saw movie, which I actually think is a great movie despite the sort of inconsistent quality of the sequels, which he didn't have an awful lot of involvement in. I have a lot of time for Dead Silence. I think Death Sentence that he did with Kevin Bacon is very underrated, and I absolutely adore Insidious, which was his last sort of unique spin on the haunted house film. Now, this film basically follows real-life paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren, played by Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga. Now, their characters in real life were apparently involved in the Amityville haunting, among other hauntings that were sort of later turned into movies, but this is the first movie to feature them as characters and to deal with their case where they helped a family called the Perrons, played by Ron Livingston, Lily Taylor, who have 5 daughters. The reason being, apparently, this case was one of the more savage and evil cases that they ever had to deal with throughout their careers, and they've not wanted to sort of reveal the secrets until now. So I would say it's very loosely based on a true story. Now, I do believe in the sort of paranormal and supernatural, but, you know, even I know that this will be, you know, this will have had quite a lot of artistic license applied to it, but needless to say, the people involved are real, and I'm sure that some of the situations they found themselves in are real. So that immediately adds a certain sense of authenticity to the film, and probably helps when the film, you know, in its late stages becomes frightening. It helps the audience to sort of buy into it. So essentially the film opens and we have Ed and Lorraine Warren talking to a couple of nurses about a previous case, and it sort of introduces their approach to how they deal with paranormal investigations, and it establishes that they always look for sort of rational explanations first and foremost. They say, look, most times out of 10 there'll be a rational explanation for what you think is a haunting. So we sort of establish that, and the actual opening is very, very creepy. It features a lot of James Wan hallmarks, the most obvious of which being a sort of porcelain ventriloquist doll puppet looking thing, which are in almost all of his movies. So once we have that scene out of the way, we're introduced to the Perrons, who move into a new home, although it's like an old farmhouse. The house itself probably couldn't look any more frightening if it tried. So straight away, you know, you sort of know what to expect. But what I really like about how James Wan does these movies, and he did this with Insidious as well, is that as the parents moving into their home, you have a sort of one take, one shot, fluid, steady cam sort of tracking shot through the house, and it establishes the layout of the house, you know, where rooms are in relation to each other, so the audience can familiarise themselves with the layout, so that when it all kicks off later in the movie and you see people running around, you have an idea of where they are, and I think it's a clever way of doing it. It did that in Insidious as well, and I thought it was quite clever back then as well. So I really sort of dug the fact that stylistically, you know, he tries to make it as easy as the audience, as easy as possible for the audience to sort of understand what's going on later on when it all hits the fan. So needless to say, stuff goes bump in the night for the Perrons, and they gets to the stage where they call in the Warrens to investigate, and they're fairly desperate to say, please, please, please come to our house and find out what's happening. Needless to say as well, when the Warrens get there, it all kicks off. Now, what I liked about this movie was that it's actually one of the only horror movies in a long time, along with Insidious and also stuff like Paranormal Activity, the first one. It's genuinely unsettling. Now, there are a few jump scares in there, but they are few and far between, and they do feel quite real in a sense that, you know how a lot of jump scares, they'll startle you and it'll turn out, oh, it's just a cat running across the room. But no, these are sort of genuine moments of horror. Although, as you know, or as I think you might know, is I'm not a fan of jump scares. I find them quite cheap, but I think James Wan, for the most part, stays away from them in favour of genuinely unsettling the audience. And I have to say that this film is very, very unsettling. It's very effective. I mean, unfortunately, it didn't have the desired effect on me because we had quite a badly behaved audience while we were watching this, so I'm going to pick it up when it comes out on Blu-ray and rewatch it, you know, in the living room in the dark, and hopefully it'll work a little bit better for me. But there were scenes that were genuinely unsettling, a lot of which I think you see in the trailer. And I appreciated that. A lot of the effects as well are largely practical, which gives the film a certain sort of, again, a sense of authenticity. And I mean, you guys, you know, practical effects always look better than CGI. It's very well shot, you know, visually it's probably James Wan's most sort of accomplished movie, and he did say as well that in interviews before it came out that sort of visually he wanted this to look like a movie from the 70s, you know, he wanted it to look like it could have come out at the same time as the original Amityville Horror movie. So from that point of view, it does completely fit that mould. The actual scares themselves, there's nothing in here that you haven't seen before, and I'm sure that sort of horror movie connoisseurs will be able to pick out, you know, oh, this scene's from this movie and this scene's from this movie and we've seen that there and blah blah blah. But when it's not reinventing the wheel, it's just showing why the wheel works so well in the first place. It is very effective. I mean, James Wan is very good at building a sense of dread, and this is something that he's done in all of his other movies. He's very good at building a sense of dread and anticipation of what's going to happen. It's almost a very sort of Hitchcockian approach, and it keeps you on the edge of your seat. You are genuinely on the edge of your seat when you're watching his movies. It's something he does really well. The film itself, towards the end when it really kicks off and it reveals what's going on, and we have the sort of climactic sort of confrontation, I won't spoil it, but it runs the risk of becoming silly, but he manages to keep it grounded. There's nothing in this movie that sort of sticks out like a sore thumb that you think, oh well, that's just stupid, you know, because I know that people had that criticism with Insidious. Now I didn't. I loved Insidious. I loved the fact that the first half was like Lars von Trier movie, the second half was a Sam Raimi movie. I loved that film. This film though, it never ventures that far into the sort of the silly aspects of these horror movies, but he manages to keep it grounded, and I appreciate that because it is a different film from Insidious. The story that they reveal, the reason for the parents' new house being haunted, I won't spoil it again, but let's put it this way: it's no wonder the house was haunted. Another thing that I wanted to comment on that I don't think a lot of reviewers have is that I really enjoyed sort of all the actresses playing the 5 daughters in this movie. I thought were all really good, because it's too often you watch a horror movie like this and the kids are annoying, and there's always a kid that plays with one of the ghosts, you know, and that just wouldn't happen, because it's like, I think another reviewer said this, and it's something I completely agree with. If I was like 5 years old and a ghost came into my room at night, I'd shit myself and cry until I was sick, you know. So the fact that there's always a kid that plays with the ghost can be irritating, but they sort of take that cliche in this movie, and you know, it doesn't, I didn't find it irritating. I actually found all the actresses playing the daughters to be quite good. I mean, don't get me wrong, they weren't given an awful lot to do, because the focus is very much on the Warrens and then their parents, but you know, I thought they were all actually quite good, and all the performances were quite effective for the scenes where they had to be scared. I thought they did really well, so that was an aspect of it I really enjoyed. I enjoyed the soundtrack. As I said, it's shot really well. The scares, for the most part, are all sort of they're more reliant on creeping the audience out and making them jump. The effects are largely practical. It's a really good, solid horror movie. I mean, I am a fan of the sort of 1970s haunted house movies or possession movies, or, you know, films that look like The Exorcist and the Amityville Horror. I love that sort of stuff. And to see a film that, like James Wan said, could have quite easily come out when they did, and it definitely stands up alongside them as well as a solid horror movie. I really sort of appreciated that he was harkening back to a period of horror that unfortunately we don't really get to see very much anymore. I mean, possession movies have been a dime a dozen recently. You know, you have the Exorcism of Emily Rose, you've had the Last Exorcism Part 2, but the sort of out and out sort of haunted house movies of this nature, you know, we don't get to see them very often. So I enjoyed it from that perspective. I thought it was very solid. I'm looking forward to seeing Insidious 2. If this film is anything to go by, I have high hopes for Insidious 2. This definitely almost feels like James Wan saying goodbye to the horror genre, you know, because next year he's going to go off and make Fast and Furious 7, which is very odd. But if this is this and Insidious 2 are the last of his horror movies, then it's a great swan song for his horror genre. So I would highly recommend The Conjuring. You know, if you go prepared to be creeped out, you will, and you'll probably sleep with the lights on.